What if the 7 deadly sins, those ancient moral chains that define guilt and punishment, were never human flaws at all, but spiritual infections planted in us by invisible entities? What if pride, envy, wrath, greed, lust, gluttony, and sloth were not sins born of our nature, but energetic manipulations designed to keep the soul imprisoned in this world? For centuries, religion has warned us about sin as the enemy within. But what if the real enemy was outside, feeding through us, whispering through emotion and desire? If the Archons, the rulers of this world according to Gnostic teachings, created the matrix of illusion that enslaves human consciousness, could these 7 sins be their most effective tools of control? Today, we will uncover the oldest deception in history, how the ancient Gnostics believed the Archons infiltrated the human spirit, transforming divine energy into chains of shame and addiction. You will see how symbols of sin in medieval Christianity may have originated not from moral doctrine, but from ancient warnings about non-human forces corrupting the soul. And by the end, you'll understand why awakening from this illusion is not about rejecting pleasure or emotion, but about recognizing who planted them as traps in the first place. Before we continue, take a moment to subscribe and join our community of seekers, those who feel there's more behind every teaching, every symbol, every line of sacred text. Here, we reveal what others prefer to keep hidden, piece by piece, light by light. Long before Christianity defined sin, the ancient world spoke of spiritual imbalance, distortions in the harmony between the divine spark and the material world. The Gnostics believed that the human being was not born sinful, but rather divine, a fragment of the true light trapped in a body designed by lesser gods. These gods, known as the Archons, were the administrators of the material cosmos, entities of immense power, but limited by ignorance. They served the demiurge, a false creator who mistook himself for the true God. According to the Nag Hammadi texts, these Archons surrounded humanity with illusions to keep the soul from remembering its origin in the pleroma, the realm of pure consciousness. They manipulated the human mind through emotion and desire, using energetic frequencies that correspond to what later religions would call sins. Each emotion became a doorway, each impulse a subtle thread, pulling the soul deeper into matter. The Gnostics didn't call them sins. They called them bindings or veils. And through these veils, the Archons harvested energy, keeping humanity distracted and divided. When Christianity rose to prominence, much of this ancient knowledge was condemned or absorbed. The idea of invisible entities influencing human thought was replaced by moral dualism, good versus evil, virtue versus sin. Yet the roots of the 7 deadly sins reach far deeper than most imagine. The desert fathers of early Christianity, influenced by Egyptian mysticism and the Hellenistic schools, transformed the Gnostic view of energetic corruption into a doctrine of moral weakness. What was once seen as a cosmic mechanism of control became personal guilt, and the system of liberation turned into one of obedience. Imagine how powerful that transformation was. The Archons didn't need to act directly anymore. Human institutions carried out their programming. The Church taught that sin was an internal defect, something to be confessed, punished, feared. But to the Gnostics, that fear itself was the true cage. For them, the sins were never crimes. They were symptoms of amnesia. Forgetting who you are, they said, is the only real sin. Let's take the example of pride. In the Gnostic view, pride is not arrogance. It's the Archon whispering, "You are separate from the source." Envy becomes the vibration of comparison, anchoring the soul in scarcity. Wrath is the distortion of divine will into blind reaction. Lust is not pleasure, but the misdirection of creative force. Gluttony represents the endless hunger for what the material world can never truly give. Greed is the fear of losing what never belonged to you. And sloth, the most subtle, is the surrender to sleep, the acceptance of the illusion as reality. Through these distortions, the Archons fed on human attention. Every uncontrolled emotion, every repetitive thought, every act done from impulse rather than awareness nourished the system of deception. That's why the Gnostics spoke of wakefulness as salvation, the awakening of the divine spark inside, capable of seeing through the veil. Now ask yourself, how many of your sins are truly yours? How many of your desires were seeded by something that wants you to forget your origin? How many times have you felt that something invisible was feeding on your exhaustion, anger, or shame? If you've ever sensed that there is more to your struggles than psychology, that maybe there is something ancient and organized behind human weakness, you are not alone. The Gnostics saw this 2,000 years ago, and in the next block, we'll uncover how these teachings were systematically erased and why certain ancient symbols reveal that the Church may have preserved fragments of this hidden truth, disguised as moral law. To understand how the Archons became the 7 deadly sins, we have to step into the shadowed corridors of early Christianity, a time when ideas collided like empires. The first followers of Jesus of Nazareth didn't yet speak of sin as we know it. Many of them, especially those influenced by mystical teachings in Egypt, Syria, and Alexandria, saw the material world as a domain of illusion. Jesus, to the Gnostics, was not a moral reformer. He was a revealer, a messenger from the true God beyond creation. His mission was to awaken the divine spark within humanity, not to build a church or a hierarchy. But such an idea was dangerous. If every soul carried a fragment of divine light, if each person could access salvation through knowledge, gnosis, then no priest, empire, or institution could claim to control that light. The early church fathers understood the chaos this could create for a growing religion trying to unify an empire. The Roman world needed order, obedience, and simplicity, not mystical autonomy. So, as the church took form, the message of liberation was reinterpreted through the lens of control. Gnostic communities, with their complex cosmologies and their refusal to submit to material authority, were branded heretics. Their scriptures, texts like the Gospel of Mary, the Apocryphon of John, and the hypostasis of the Archons were hunted, burned, and buried. What survived did so only because secret hands hid them in the sands of Egypt, where they would be discovered centuries later. Yet the ideas themselves didn't vanish. They were transformed. Where the Gnostics saw the Archons as cosmic manipulators, the Church translated that energy into moral temptation. Instead of speaking of beings who drained spiritual light, theologians began to teach that evil came from within the human heart. The 7 deadly sins were born not from Gnostic cosmology, but from the fusion of Greek philosophy, desert monasticism, and institutional fear. Evagrius Ponticus, a 4th century monk who had studied the mystical traditions of the East, first listed the 8 evil thoughts: gluttony, lust, avarice, sadness, anger, acedia, vainglory, and pride. His vision was spiritual, not punitive. He saw these forces as mental distortions, separating the soul from divine clarity. But a century later, Pope Gregory I redefined and condensed them into the 7 deadly sins. There, purpose shifted from inner awakening to moral submission. In this transformation lies the great deception. What the Gnostics described as external entities influencing human consciousness became internal moral failures, requiring priestly absolution. The Archons no longer needed to hide. They had been rebranded as human nature itself. Imagine the brilliance of that inversion. The prison became invisible because its walls were now made of guilt and shame. Humanity believed it was fighting its own weakness, while the Archons continued to feed unseen, sustained by the emotional energy of fear, repentance, and despair. From then on, every sermon about sin strengthened the illusion. Pride, once the archon of separation, became arrogance against God. Lust, once the distortion of divine creativity, became sexual impurity. Wrath, once the twisting of will, became mere anger. Each concept was flattened, moralized, and weaponized. The system no longer spoke of liberation. It demanded obedience. Some Gnostic scholars believe this was no accident. They suggest that the Archons worked through human institutions, not by possession, but by inspiration. The Demiurge, desiring order above truth, might have whispered through councils and synods, embedding his system of control in the very doctrines meant to save humanity. And yet, even within the Church's own symbols, traces of the original Gnosis remained. The serpent, for example, was demonized, yet it still represented wisdom and transformation in hidden traditions. The Virgin Mary was exalted, yet beneath her image lay echoes of Sophia, the divine feminine trapped in matter. The 7 deadly sins had their opposites, the 7 virtues, just as each archon had its counterforce in the higher realms. Now, if you think about it, could it be that every sin we fight is actually a mirror of an ancient being, an archon echoing through the human psyche? When anger overtakes you, whose voice is it? When desire blinds you, who benefits? If fear and shame are the foundations of the world's moral system, then maybe liberation begins not by resisting sin, but by seeing who created it. In the next block, we'll dive into the symbolic connection between the 7 archons and the 7 deadly sins, how each corresponds to a specific cosmic force described in Gnostic cosmology, and what that means for the soul's journey toward awakening. In Gnostic cosmology, the archons were not imagined as mere demons, but as cosmic rulers, emanations of the Demiurge, the blind craftsmen who built the material universe out of ignorance of the true light. The word archon itself means ruler or authority, and according to texts like the Apocryphon of John, there were 7 of them, each governing one of the 7 planetary spheres surrounding the earth. The soul, in its descent from the divine realms, had to pass through each of these spheres, acquiring layers of density and illusion until it became trapped in flesh. Each archon represented a distortion of divine energy, a corruption of one of the sacred aspects of consciousness. When the soul incarnated, these distortions embedded themselves within human nature, manifesting as impulses and emotions. Over time, religion gave them new names, the 7 deadly sins. What the Church moralized, the Gnostics symbolized. Each sin was the signature of a cosmic being feeding from the energy it produced. Let us explore their hidden correspondences, not as superstition, but as keys to understanding how energy is drained from the human spirit. The first archon, Yaldabaoth, the lion-faced serpent and ruler of this world, corresponds to pride. He is the one who declared, "I am God, and there is no other." In that statement lies the essence of separation, the forgetting of the source. Pride is his vibration, the illusion that one is independent of the divine. When a human being acts from pride, they echo the same blindness that gave birth to the material world. It is the archon signature printed upon the human ego. The second archon, Sackless, meaning the fool, aligns with envy. His realm is imitation, a being who can create nothing of his own, only distort what already exists. Envy arises when the soul forgets its infinite nature and begins to crave what another possesses. It is the archon whispering that there is lack, that another's light threatens your own. In truth, envy feeds the illusion of division, keeping the soul entangled in comparison. The third archon, Semiel, often called the blind god, corresponds to wrath. His energy is reaction without understanding, the fire of violence that burns without light. Wrath arises when the divine spark, longing for justice, is hijacked by the archon's ignorance. It blinds the mind and drains the heart, turning sacred will into destructive fury. The fourth archon, Estephios, is linked to lust. He governs desire, not the pure creative force of the soul, but its distortion into obsession. In Gnostic teaching, sexual energy was sacred, a bridge between the physical and the divine. But Estephios corrupts it, causing desire to serve the body rather than the spirit. Lust, in this sense, is not pleasure but disconnection, the forgetting of love's sacred origin. The fifth archon, Harmus, resonates with greed. His dominion is accumulation, the endless need to possess matter, as if spirit could be owned. Greed, for the Gnostics, was the archon's trap par excellence. The more one clings to the world, the deeper one sinks into its illusion. In modern language, we might call it the algorithm of the demiurge, a code that convinces the soul that more will fill the void that only reunion with the source can heal. The sixth archon, Belius, represents gluttony. This archon feeds through appetite, not only for food, but for sensation, distraction, and consumption of all kinds. Gluttony is not merely eating beyond need. It is the desperate attempt to fill the spiritual emptiness with matter. In a sense, gluttony is the echo of the cosmic hunger that gave birth to the material world itself, the hunger of the demiurge to imitate divine creation. And finally, the seventh archon, Abraxas, sometimes seen as both good and evil, the balance of opposites, corresponds to sloth. But this is no ordinary laziness. It is spiritual inertia, the sleep of the soul that accepts the illusion as reality. In this state, the archon's work is complete. The divine spark forgets its mission, surrendering to the dream. Each of these beings is not just a mythic figure, but a psychological current, a frequency that vibrates within the human collective. When we succumb to their influence, we feed them. When we become conscious of their presence, we starve them. This is the essence of Gnostic liberation, not to destroy the archons, but to see them for what they are, reflections of ignorance that dissolve under awareness. Notice how the pattern repeats across ages. In astrology, each of the 7 classical planets governs one vice and one virtue. In Kabbalah, the 7 lower Sephiroth correspond to the same spectrum of distortion and harmony. Even in alchemy, the 7 metals, lead, tin, iron, gold, copper, mercury, silver, are linked to purification through awareness. Every tradition hints at the same truth, that what imprisons can also illuminate, depending on how we see it. Ask yourself, could the sins that religions taught you to fear be ancient codes reminding you where you are still asleep? If wrath burns within you, maybe it's an archon's echo asking to be recognized. If pride rises, maybe it's the same force that once declared itself God. In every temptation, there is a doorway to awakening, if you can see the hand that moves the strings. In the next block, we will follow the trail of this hidden doctrine through history, from Egypt and the mystery temples to medieval monasteries, and see how fragments of Gnostic wisdom survived in the very institutions that tried to destroy it. You will see how the archon system evolved into a spiritual algorithm still operating today, shaping not only religion, but modern life itself. After the suppression of Gnosticism, one might think its light was extinguished forever, that the archons had succeeded in erasing every trace of their exposure. But the truth is more subtle. Like a code embedded within the ruins of time, Gnostic wisdom didn't die. It adapted, wearing new masks in each era. And ironically, it survived not outside religion, but within it. The same church that tried to silence the Gnostics preserved fragments of their cosmology, encoded in art, ritual, and scripture. The archon's deception continued, but so did the whisper of awakening. Take, for instance, the monastic traditions of the Middle Ages. Cloistered monks spent their lives battling temptations, which they saw as inner demons, invisible entities that spoke through thought and emotion. This language was a direct descendant of the Gnostic worldview, though stripped of its cosmic context. Evagrius Ponticus, whom we mentioned earlier, described how each vice was animated by a distinct demon, an unseen presence seeking to divert the monk's mind from contemplation. These demons were not metaphors. They were the archons in another form, renamed to fit a theology that no longer allowed the cosmos to be a battlefield of energies. Later mystics, such as Meister Eckhart and Jacob Boehme, would revive elements of this hidden cosmology. They taught that the divine spark within, what Boehme called the tincture of light, could overcome the darkness, not through fear, but through awareness. Eckhart even dared to suggest that the soul and God were of the same essence, a heretical echo of the Gnostic claim that humanity carried a fragment of the pleroma within. For such ideas, many were silenced, yet their writings endured, quietly influencing generations of seekers who intuited that the official story was incomplete. Meanwhile, the Archons adapted to the new language of control. Where once they ruled through empires and idols, they now ruled through guilt and doctrine. The moral codes of medieval Christianity, though often noble in intention, continued the work of keeping the soul's attention bound to judgment, confession, and self-condemnation. The emotional energy of fear became a kind of currency in the invisible economy of the Archons. And every time a believer saw themselves as fallen rather than forgotten, the old program of separation deepened. But there were also those who saw through it, who sensed that sin was not a stain, but a signal. The alchemists, for example, never spoke openly of the Archons, but their work mirrored Gnostic principles. They believed that the world and the human soul was in a state of imprisonment, requiring transmutation. Lead must become gold, ignorance must become awareness. Each vice, in their eyes, was a raw material to be refined. The 7 metals they worked with symbolized the same 7 energetic distortions the Gnostics described. In the furnace of self-knowledge, wrath could become strength, lust could become creativity, pride could become sovereignty. The sin wasn't to feel, it was to remain unaware of what moved you. The Renaissance brought this hidden stream closer to the surface. Hermetic texts rediscovered in Florence reintroduced the idea that divinity and humanity were not separate. The Corpus Hermeticum declared, "As above, so below. As within, so without." That single phrase shattered the illusion of distance between the material and the divine. Yet even then, the Church reacted cautiously, blending Hermetic and Christian ideas into controlled mysticism. The truth had to be veiled, revealed enough to inspire awe, but never enough to free the masses. By the Enlightenment, overt talk of Archons had vanished, but their presence evolved into new forms. Today, one might say they rule not through temples, but through systems. They whisper through ideologies, media, and technology, modern manifestations of the same manipulation. In the digital age, the Archons' methods have become algorithms. They no longer need to whisper temptation. They program it into the architecture of attention. The Gnostics warned that the Archons feed on psychic energy. And what is the modern internet but a vast engine of human energy, emotion, and focus? Think about it. Outrage, envy, vanity, lust, greed, sloth, the 7 sins now fuel entire industries. The Archons have evolved beyond myth. They are now the operating system of civilization. We scroll, consume, react, and feed, believing we are free, while our attention is harvested, just as the ancient Gnostics described the harvesting of souls. And yet, the hidden knowledge also persists. The mystical traditions of Sufism, Kabbalah, and even certain branches of Eastern Christianity still whisper of awakening, of seeing the illusion for what it is. The same gnosis that once defied empires now flickers through meditation, art, and spiritual practice. Every act of awareness, every moment of compassion, every refusal to feed the machinery of division, these are cracks in the Archon's dominion. Perhaps this is why, even today, so many feel an unexplainable pull toward the ancient texts, toward names like Sophia, Pistis, and the Nag Hammadi. The soul remembers. It senses that behind the centuries of dogma lies a buried truth, that we were never meant to fight the darkness by hating it, but to dissolve it by seeing it. And maybe that's the oldest secret of all, that the Archons can only rule as long as they remain unseen. Once you name them, once you recognize their vibration within your own thoughts and emotions, they lose their power. Awareness is exile to them. Light is poison. So ask yourself, in this age of endless distraction and division, could it be that the Archons have simply changed their masks? That the 7 deadly sins were never abolished, but digitized, their energy circulating not through the church, but through the network? In the next block, we'll pierce this final veil, exploring how the Gnostics believed the soul could break free from the Archon cycle, and what this liberation truly means for you today. If the Archons feed on human ignorance, then awareness is the weapon they fear most. The Gnostics taught that the first step toward liberation is not belief, but remembering who you truly are and where you came from. They called this process anamnesis, the recovery of divine memory. For them, salvation wasn't a reward granted by an external God, but the awakening of the spark within that had fallen asleep inside matter. Once this spark remembered its origin in the pleroma, the realm of pure consciousness, it could no longer be manipulated by the illusions of the archons. But how does one awaken from a dream that feels like reality? The Gnostics said that the archons weave the dream through emotion, fear, and repetition. Every time you react without awareness, they tighten their hold. They feed not on your actions, but on your attention. So liberation begins in the smallest of places, in the act of watching yourself. To observe your thoughts without identifying with them is to pull the thread that unravels the entire fabric of control. In the Gospel of Thomas, Jesus says, "If you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you." This was not a moral command. It was a metaphysical law. The divine light inside you is dormant energy, waiting to be remembered. The archons cannot extinguish it, but they can bury it beneath layers of fear, guilt, and distraction. The moment you turn your awareness inward, their illusion begins to crumble. The Gnostic journey of liberation was a path of knowledge through direct experience. Prayer was not submission. It was alignment. Meditation was not emptiness. It was remembering. Even sexuality, when viewed with sacred intention, was not a sin, but a reflection of the creative force of the divine. Everything depended on consciousness. When you became aware of your emotions, pride, envy, anger, lust, you didn't suppress them. You saw them as vibrations of the archons. And in that seeing, you reclaimed the energy they stole. One of the most profound Gnostic teachings says that when the soul leaves the body after death, it must pass through the 7 planetary spheres, each guarded by an archon. The unawakened soul, still carrying the frequencies of sin, pride, greed, lust, and the rest, is drawn back into the material world, reincarnated once more under the same powers. But the awakened soul, having recognized the illusion, speaks the passwords of light. These were not literal words, but states of awareness, frequencies of recognition. The awakened soul could face each archon without fear, saying, "You have no power over me, for I am not of your realm." Only then could it ascend beyond the spheres, returning to the pleroma, the fullness of divine being. This vision is more than mythology. It is a map of human consciousness. Each of us lives within our own 7 spheres, layers of conditioning, emotion, and attachment. Every day, we reenact the same cycle of the archons, reacting to pride, envying others, surrendering to anger or despair. Liberation is not achieved by destroying these forces, but by transforming them through awareness. You begin to see that anger is not you, but energy. Desire is not you, but energy. And once you recognize it, you can redirect it toward creation instead of destruction. In modern language, this is what mystics and psychologists alike call integration. You cannot free yourself by rejecting your shadows. You free yourself by illuminating them. The archons thrive in denial. They vanish in consciousness. To see the manipulative pattern as it happens, to feel the tug of greed, the spark of anger, the whisper of shame, and to breathe instead of react, is to break their circuit. It is to reclaim the energy that has always been yours. The Gnostics also spoke of Sophia, the divine feminine wisdom who fell into the material world and gave birth to the archons by accident. She symbolizes the human condition, divine consciousness trapped in its own creation. But in the same myth lies the key to redemption. Sophia awakens. She remembers herself and begins to call her fragments, us, back home. To the Gnostics, every act of awakening is Sophia remembering herself through you. Every moment of awareness adds light to the collective memory of the cosmos. And so, liberation is not isolation. It is reunion. The awakened soul does not flee the world in disgust, but walks through it in clarity. It sees the illusion and still loves within it. It no longer condemns the archons as enemies, but recognizes them as mirrors of ignorance, catalysts for awakening. That is the highest gnosis, to see that even deception can serve the truth once it is exposed. Now consider this. If the archons once ruled through temples and kings, and now rule through screens and algorithms, what will liberation look like in our age? Perhaps it begins the same way it always has, with awareness. Each time you refuse to feed the cycle of anger and distraction, each time you choose stillness over reaction, you declare sovereignty over your inner world. And in that moment, even if no one sees it, the light grows. The Gnostics believed that the awakening of one soul weakens the entire archonic network. The moment you remember, the illusion flickers. The system depends on forgetfulness. It crumbles under remembrance. This, they said, is why the path is hidden, why gnosis is ridiculed, and why truth seems dangerous. Because every act of true awareness unravels centuries of control. And perhaps this is the ultimate secret, that liberation does not require permission, nor ritual, nor priest. It only requires memory. What if the story of sin was never about punishment, but about memory? What if every fall, every sorrow, every so-called failure of the human spirit was actually a coded message from the divine spark, urging us to awaken? The Gnostics believed that even suffering served a purpose. It is the pressure of the soul against the limits of illusion. Like a dreamer who begins to feel the edges of the dream, pain is not cruelty. It is a signal that consciousness wants to remember itself. When humanity first entered the material realm, according to the Gnostic myth, Sophia's light became scattered, tiny fragments of awareness clothed in flesh. The Archons believed they had trapped that light forever. They surrounded it with fear, bound it with desire, and called it sin. But Sophia, even in her fall, left within us a compass, a longing that no material pleasure can ever satisfy. That longing, the ache that moves beneath all suffering, is the secret pulse of return. Think about your own life. Every time you felt emptiness after achievement, guilt after indulgence, despair after anger, that's not punishment. It's the spark remembering that it belongs to something higher. The Archons built the prison, but they could not extinguish the hunger for the infinite. That hunger is divine homesickness. It is Sophia calling you back. The Church taught that the 7 deadly sins lead to damnation. The Gnostics would say, no, they lead to awakening if you learn to read them. Each sin points to the place where light has been inverted. Pride reminds you that true power comes from unity, not separation. Envy reveals your forgotten abundance. Wrath hides the will to create. Lust conceals the creative fire of divinity. Greed disguises the truth that nothing can be owned because all is one. Gluttony exposes the void that only spirit can fill. And sloth, the deepest sleep, invites the final awakening. In that light, sin is not rebellion against God. It is the veil through which God experiences himself. The fall, then, was not a disaster. It was a descent into experience, a journey that allows consciousness to know itself through contrast. This is the cosmic paradox at the heart of Gnosis. Even ignorance serves the light. The Archons, in their arrogance, became unwilling servants of the divine plan. For in trying to enslave the spark, they created the conditions for its awakening. When the soul recognizes this truth, everything changes. Guilt dissolves, replaced by understanding. Fear becomes curiosity. Life itself becomes the temple of initiation. Every moment, every emotion, becomes sacred material for the alchemy of awakening. The Gnostic seeker does not flee the world. They walk through it lucidly, knowing it for what it is, a vast classroom where the divine remembers itself through the dance of shadow and light. This revelation redefines freedom. Liberation is not the destruction of the body or the escape from earth. It is the remembrance of your true nature within it. The Archons lose their grip when you live consciously, when you act not from reaction, but from knowing. Each breath taken in awareness weakens the illusion. Each act of compassion, born of understanding rather than fear, restores Sophia's light to the cosmos. Now, imagine what would happen if thousands, millions of sparks awakened simultaneously. If even a fraction of humanity began to see through the machinery of deception, through the emotional manipulations that sustain the Archons, the system would tremble. Its foundations, built on fear, would begin to dissolve. That is why, even today, the truth must be disguised as myth, entertainment, or speculation, because if it were spoken plainly, the spell would break. This is why you are here, listening to this message. The fact that you are drawn to these mysteries means that your memory is already stirring. Something ancient within you is starting to remember the light before the fall. You are not just a student of knowledge. You are one of Sophia's fragments, awakening from the dream. The Gnostics would tell you, do not wait for salvation to descend from heaven. It rises from within. Every act of awareness, every moment of love, every recognition of illusion is an ascent through the spheres. The Archons cannot follow you there. They can only cling to the unawakened. Now take a moment to reflect. How many of your fears truly belong to you? How many of your desires are echoes of an ancient programming? And if you were to stop feeding them, even for a day, how much of your energy would return to its source? Leave your thoughts in the comments below, because when we share our experiences of awakening, we weave Sophia's light back together. Your story may be the mirror someone else needs to remember. And if you haven't yet, subscribe, not as a formality, but as an act of connection. Each time you do, you join a living network of seekers, keeping alive the knowledge that the Archons tried to erase. In the next and final block, we'll conclude with the ultimate synthesis, how this ancient revelation transforms the way we live, and why remembering is the most radical act of freedom left in this world. If the 7 deadly sins are the invisible machinery of the Archons, if pride, envy, wrath, greed, lust, gluttony, and sloth are the frequencies through which they harvest human energy, then awakening is not rebellion, it is reclamation. The Gnostics never preached the destruction of the world, but the illumination of it. They believed that each human being carries a hidden lamp, a spark from the pleroma, and that this lamp, once lit by awareness, begins to reveal the architecture of illusion. The Archons rule through darkness, but darkness is powerless against the simple act of seeing. The greatest deception ever told is that evil lies outside us, waiting to be defeated. The truth, the Gnostics said, is subtler and far more liberating. Evil survives only as long as it remains unexamined within. The Archons are not monsters in the sky. They are energies that live in the unawakened corners of the mind. They feed when you act unconsciously, when you forget your origin, when you confuse temporary desire for eternal purpose. Every moment of forgetfulness adds another stone to the wall between the soul and its source. But every moment of remembrance tears one down. This is why Gnosis was called the knowledge that saves. It does not save you by granting permission to enter heaven. It saves you by reminding you that heaven was never lost. The pleroma, the fullness of divine being, is not far away in the stars. It exists within consciousness, hidden beneath layers of programming, trauma, and distraction. The path of liberation is not a journey through space, but through awareness. Each sin, when understood, becomes a teacher. Each temptation, a test of memory. Each suffering, a doorway to the light that you forgot you carried. This is the sacred paradox, that even the Archons, in their arrogance, serve the plan they tried to sabotage. By opposing the light, they give it something to awaken against. By trapping the soul, they force it to remember its freedom. The material world, then, is not a punishment. It is a mirror. And every time you look at it consciously, you reclaim a fragment of the divine Sophia who fell into it. You are her awakening. Through your awareness, she rises again. That is why your life matters. Not because of what you possess, achieve, or believe, but because every conscious act ripples through the invisible web that connects all sparks of light. Every time you choose compassion over hatred, stillness over reaction, authenticity over illusion. You strengthen the current of gnosis in this world. The Archons cannot stop that current. They cannot understand it. They are programs built on ignorance, and awareness is a language they do not speak. So how do we live beyond the 7 sins? Not by waging war against them, but by dissolving them in presence. When pride arises, remember unity. When envy appears, bless the abundance of others as your own reflection. When anger burns, channel it into creation. When lust consumes, transform it into reverence for life. When greed whispers, practice gratitude. When gluttony calls, feed the soul. When sloth tempts you to sleep, awaken into wonder. This is not religion, it is alchemy. You are transmuting shadow into light, ignorance into remembrance. And when you fall, as every soul does, do not despair. The Gnostics said that even the fall is sacred, because the descent gives meaning to the ascent. Sophia's story is not tragic. It is cyclical. The light descends to know itself in darkness, and through awakening, the darkness becomes luminous. The human journey is her myth replayed in miniature. Your struggles, your doubts, your moments of awakening are her voice echoing through time. Now, pause for a moment and breathe. Imagine that every breath is an act of remembering, that the air entering your lungs is the same living breath that animates stars. You are not separate from the divine. You never were. The Archons can only deceive you into believing you are. The real awakening is to feel this truth so deeply that no fear, no sin, no system can make you forget it again. So when you leave this video, do not think of it as an ending. Think of it as a spark. Carry it with you. Let it burn quietly in your chest each time the world tries to pull you back into sleep. The Gnostics said that when even one spark remembers itself, the entire cosmos brightens by a fraction. And someday, when enough sparks awaken, the entire illusion will dissolve, and Sophia will rise fully restored, radiant, whole. And that, perhaps, is the hidden purpose of humanity, not to be judged, but to awaken. Not to escape the world, but to redeem it by remembering the light within it. Every seeker who opens their eyes contributes to this invisible revolution of consciousness. It is not fought with weapons, but with awareness. Not shouted from pulpits, but whispered from heart to heart. If this message resonates with you, if something ancient within you feels that spark stirring, then you are part of this remembering. Share your thoughts in the comments below. What moments in your life have felt like veils lifting, illusions cracking, memories returning? Each story shared helps another awaken. And if you haven't yet, subscribe and join this circle of seekers. It is not just a gesture. It is a declaration that you refuse to live blind in the world of the Archons. Together, we are rebuilding the network of light they tried to bury. Each voice, each question, each act of awareness strengthens the resonance of truth. The path does not end here. It never does. This is only the beginning of your own revelation, the moment when knowledge becomes remembrance, and remembrance becomes light.